Chapter 34. The final chapter in Life, the Universe, and Everything. And, at the end, they travelled again. There was a time when Arthur Dent would not. He said that the beast-dramatic drive had revealed to him that time and distance were one, that mind and universe were one, that perception and reality were one, and that the more one travelled, the more one stayed in one place, and that what with one thing and another, he would rather just stay put for a while and sort it all out in his mind, which was now at one with the universe, so it shouldn't take too long, and he could get a good rest afterward, put in a little flying practice, and learn to cook, which he had always meant to do. The can of Greek olive oil was now his most prized possession, and he said that the way it had unexpectedly turned up in his life had again given him a certain sense of the oneness of things, which made him feel that. He yawned and fell asleep. In the morning, as they prepared to take him to some quiet and idyllic planet where they wouldn't mind his talking like that, they suddenly picked up a computer-driven distress call and diverted to investigate. A small but apparently undamaged spacecraft of the Merida class seemed to be dancing a strange little jig through the void. A brief computer scan revealed that the ship was fine, its computer was fine, but that its pilot was mad. Half mad, the man insisted as they carried him, raving aboard. He was a journalist with the Sidereal Daily Mentioner. They sedated him and sent Marvin in to keep him company until he promised to try to talk sense. "I was covering a trial," he said at last, "on Argabuthon." He pushed himself up onto his thin and wasted shoulders. His eyes stared wildly. His white hair seemed to be waving at someone it knew in the next room. "Easy, easy," said Ford. Trillian put a soothing hand on his shoulder. The man sank back down again and stared at the ceiling of the ship's sickbay. "The case," he said. "It is now immaterial, but there was a witness, a man called Prak. A strange and difficult man. They were eventually forced to administer a drug to make him tell the truth. A truth drug." His eyes rolled helplessly in his head. "They gave him too much," he said in a tiny whimper. "They gave him much too much." He started to cry. "I think the robots must have jogged the surgeon's arm." "Robots?" said Zaphod sharply. "What robots?" "Some white robots," whispered the man hoarsely. "Broke into the courtroom and stole the judge's scepter, the Argabuthon scepter of justice. Nasty plastic thing. I don't know why they wanted it." He began to cry again. "I think they jogged the surgeon's arm." He shook his head loosely from side to side, helplessly, sadly, his eyes screwed up in pain. "And when the trial continued," he said in a weeping whisper, "they asked Prak a most unfortunate thing. They asked him—" He paused and shivered. "To tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Only don't you see?" He suddenly hoisted himself up onto his elbows again and shouted at them. "They'd given him too much of the drug!" He collapsed again, moaning quietly. "Much too much too much too much too." The group gathered around his bedside, glanced at one another. There were goosebumps on backs. "What happened?" said Zaphod at last. "Oh, he told it all right," said the man savagely. "For all I know, he's still telling it now. Strange, terrible things. Terrible, terrible." They tried to calm him, but he struggled to his elbows again. "Terrible things, incomprehensible things," he shouted. "Things that would drive a man mad." He stared wildly at them. "Or in my case," he said, "half mad. I'm a journalist." "You mean," said Arthur quietly, "that you are used to confronting the truth?" "No," said the man with a puzzled frown. "I mean that I made an excuse and left early." He collapsed into a coma, from which he recovered only once, and briefly. On that one occasion they discovered from him the following. When it became clear what was happening, and as it became clear that Prak could not be stopped, that here was truth in its absolute and final form, the court was cleared. Not only cleared, it was sealed up, with Prak still in it. Steel walls were erected around it, and just to be on the safe side, barbed wire, electric fences, crocodile swamps, and 3 major armies were installed so that no one would ever have to hear Prak speak. "That's a pity," said Arthur. "I'd like to hear what he has to say. Presumably he would know what the question to the ultimate answer is. It's always bothered me that we never found out." "Think of a number," said the computer. "Any number." Arthur told the computer the telephone number of King's Cross railway station passenger inquiries on the grounds that it must have some function, and this might turn out to be it. The computer injected the number into the ship's reconstituted improbability drive. In relativity, matter tells space how to curve, and space tells matter how to move. The heart of gold told space to get knotted, and parked itself neatly within the inner steel parameter of the Argabuthon chamber of law. The courtroom was an austere place, a large dark chamber, clearly designed for justice rather than, for instance, pleasure. You wouldn't hold a dinner party there, at least not a successful one. The decor would get your guests down. The ceilings were high, vaulted, and very dark. Shadows lurked there with grim determination. The paneling for the walls and benches, the cladding of the heavy pillars, all were carved from the darkest and most severe trees in the fearsome forest of Argylbard. The massive black podium of justice which dominated the center of the chamber was a monster of gravity. If a sunbeam had ever managed to slink this far into the justice complex of Argabuthon, it would have turned around and slunk straight back out again. Arthur and Trillian were the first in, while Ford and Zaphod bravely kept a watch on their rear. At first it seemed totally dark and deserted. Their footsteps echoed hollowly around the chamber. This seemed curious. All the defenses were still in position and operative around the outside of the building. They had run scan checks. Therefore, they had assumed the truth-telling must still be going on. But there was nothing. Then, as their eyes became accustomed to the darkness, they spotted a dull red glow in a corner, and behind the glow, a live shadow. They swung a flashlight round onto it. Prak was lounging on a bench, smoking a listless cigarette. "Hi," he said, with a little half-wave. His voice echoed through the chamber. He was a little man with scraggy hair. He sat with his shoulders hunched forward, and his head and knees kept jiggling. He took a drag of his cigarette. They stared at him. "What's going on?" said Trillian. "Nothing," said the man, and jiggled his shoulders. Arthur shone his flashlight full on Prak's face. "We thought," he said, "that you were meant to be telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." "Oh, that," said Prak. "Yeah, I was. I finished. There's not nearly as much of it as people imagine. Some of it's pretty funny, though." He suddenly exploded into about 3 seconds of maniacal laughter and stopped again. He sat there, jiggling his head and knees. He dragged on his cigarette with a strange half-smile. Ford and Zaphod came forward out of the shadows. "Tell us about it," said Ford. "Oh, I can't remember any of it now," said Prak. "I thought of writing some of it down, but first I couldn't find a pencil, and then I thought, why bother?" There was a long silence, during which they thought they could feel the universe age a little. Prak stared into the light. "None of it," said Arthur at last. "You can remember none of it?" "No, except most of the good bits were about frogs. I remember that." Suddenly he was hooting with laughter again and stamping his feet on the ground. "You would not believe some of the things about frogs," he gasped. "Come on, let's go out and find ourselves a frog. Boy, will I ever see them in a new light." He leapt to his feet and did a tiny little dance. Then he stopped and took a long drag at his cigarette. "Let's find a frog I can laugh at," he said simply. "Anyway, who are you guys?" "We came to find you," said Trillian, deliberately not keeping the disappointment out of her face. "My name is Trillian." Prak jiggled his head. "Ford Prefect," said Ford Prefect with a shrug. Prak jiggled his head. "And I," said Zaphod, when he judged that the silence was once again deep enough to allow an announcement of such gravity to be tossed in lightly, "am Zaphod Beeblebrox." Prak jiggled his head. "Who's this guy?" said Prak, jiggling his shoulder at Arthur, who was standing silent for a moment, lost in disappointed thoughts. "Me?" said Arthur. "Oh, my name's Arthur Dent." Prak's eyes popped out of his head. "No kidding," he yelped. "You are Arthur Dent? The Arthur Dent?" He staggered backward, clutching his stomach, and convulsed with fresh paroxysms of laughter. "Hey, just think of meeting you," he gasped. "Boy," he shouted, "you are the most... Wow, you just leave the frogs standing." He howled and screamed with laughter. He fell over backward onto the bench. He hollered and yelled in hysterics. He cried with laughter, kicked his legs in the air, and beat his chest. Gradually he subsided, panting. He looked at them. He looked at Arthur. He fell back again, howling with laughter. Eventually he fell asleep. Arthur stood there with his lips twitching, while the others carried Prak comatose onto the ship. "Before we picked up Prak," said Arthur, "I was going to leave. I still want to, and I think I should do so as soon as possible." The others nodded in silence, a silence only slightly undermined by the heavily muffled and distant sound of hysterical laughter that came drifting from Prak's cabin at the farthest end of the ship. "We have questioned him," continued Arthur. "Or at least you have questioned him. I, as you know, can't go near him. On everything, and he doesn't really seem to have anything to contribute. Just the occasional snippet and things I don't wish to hear about frogs." The others tried not to smirk. "Now, I am the first to appreciate a joke," said Arthur, and then had to wait for the others to stop laughing. "I am the first." He stopped again. This time he stopped and listened to the silence. There actually was silence this time, and it had come very suddenly. Prak was quiet. For days they had lived with constant maniacal laughter ringing around the ship, only occasionally relieved by short periods of light giggling and sleep. Arthur's very soul was clenched with paranoia. This was not the silence of sleep. A buzzer sounded. A glance at a board told them that the buzzer had been sounded by Prak. "He's not well," said Trillian quietly. "The constant laughing is completely wrecking his body." Arthur's lips twitched, but he said nothing. "We'd better go in and see him," said Trillian. Trillian came out of the cabin wearing her serious face. "He wants you to go in," she said to Arthur, who was wearing his glum and tight-lipped one. He thrust his hands deep into his dressing-gown pockets and tried to think of something to say which wouldn't sound petty. It seemed terribly unfair, but he couldn't. "Please," said Trillian. He shrugged and went in, taking his glum and tight-lipped face with him, despite the reaction this always provoked from Prak. He looked down at his tormentor, who was lying quietly on the bed, ashen and wasted. His breathing was very shallow. Ford and Zaphod were standing by the bed looking awkward. "You wanted to ask me something," said Prak in a thin voice, and coughed slightly. Just the cough made Arthur stiffen, but it passed and subsided. "How do you know that?" he asked. Prak shrugged weakly. "'Cause it's true," he said simply. Arthur took the point. "Yes," he said at last in a rather strained drawl. "I did have a question, or rather, what I actually have is an answer. I wanted to know what the question was." Prak nodded sympathetically, and Arthur relaxed a little. It's a long story," he said. "But the question I would like to know is the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. All we know about it is that the answer is 42, which is a little aggravating." Prak nodded again. 42, he said. "Yes, that's right." He paused. Shadows of thought and memory crossed his face like the shadows of clouds crossing the land. "I'm afraid," he said at last, "that the question and the answer are mutually exclusive. Knowledge of one logically precludes knowledge of the other. It is impossible that both can ever be known about the same universe." He paused again. Disappointment crept into Arthur's face and snuggled down into its accustomed place. "Except," said Prak, struggling to sort a thought out, "if it happened, it seems that the question and the answer would just cancel each other out and take the universe with them, which would then be replaced by something even more bizarrely inexplicable. It is possible that this has already happened, he added with a weak smile. But there is a certain amount of uncertainty about it. A little giggle brushed through him. Arthur sat down on a stool. Oh well, he said with resignation. I was just hoping there would be some sort of reason. Do you know, said Prak, the story of the reason? Arthur said that he didn't, and Prak said that he knew that he didn't. He told it. One night, he said, a spaceship appeared in the sky of a planet that had never seen one before. The planet was Dalforsus. The ship was this one. It appeared as a brilliant new star, moving silently across the heavens. Primitive tribesmen who were sitting huddled on the cold hillsides looked up from their steaming night drinks and pointed with trembling fingers and swore that they had seen a sign from their gods, that meant that they must now arise at last and go and slay the evil princes of the plains. In the high turrets of their palaces, the princes of the plains looked up and saw the shining star, and received it unmistakably as a sign from their gods that they must go and attack the accursed tribesmen of the cold hillsides. And between them, the dwellers in the forest looked up into the sky and saw the sign of the new star, and saw it with fear and apprehension, for though they had never seen anything like it before, they too knew precisely what it foreshadowed, and they bowed their heads in despair. They knew that when the rains came, it was a sign. When the rains departed, it was a sign. When the winds rose, it was a sign. When the winds fell, it was a sign. When in the land there was born at the midnight of a full moon a goat with 3 heads, that was a sign. When in the land there was born at some time in the afternoon a perfectly normal cat or pig with no birth complications, or even just a child with a retroussé nose, that too would often be taken as a sign. So there was no doubt at all that a new star in the sky was a sign of a particularly spectacular order. And each new sign signified the same thing, that the princes of the plains and the tribesmen of the cold hillsides were about to beat the hell out of each other again. This in itself wouldn't be so bad, except that the princes of the plains and the tribesmen of the cold hillsides always elected to beat the hell out of each other in the forest, and it was always the dwellers in the forest who came off worst in these exchanges, though as far as they could see, it never had anything to do with them. And sometimes, after some of the worst of these outrages, the dwellers in the forest would send a message to either the leader of the princes of the plains or the leader of the tribesmen of the cold hillsides and demand to know the reason of this intolerable behavior. And the leader, whichever one it was, would take the messenger aside and explain the reason to him, slowly and carefully, and with great attention to the considerable detail involved. And the terrible thing was, it was a very good one. It was very clear, very rational, and tough. The messenger would hang his head and feel sad and foolish that he had not realized what a tough and complex place the real world was, and what difficulties and paradoxes had to be embraced if one was to live in it. Now do you understand? The leader would say. The messenger would nod dumbly. And you see these battles have to take place? Another dumb nod. And why they have to take place in the forest, and why it is in everybody's best interest, the forest dwellers included, that they should. In the long run. Yes. And the messenger did understand the reason, and he returned to his people in the forest. But as he approached them, as he walked through the forest and among the trees, he found that all he could remember of the reason was how terribly clear the argument had seemed. What it actually was, he couldn't remember at all. And this, of course, was a great comfort when next the tribesmen and princes came hacking and burning their way through the forest, killing every forest dweller in their way. Prak paused in his story and coughed pathetically. I was the messenger, he said. After the battles precipitated by the appearance of your ship, which were particularly savage, many of our people died. I thought I could bring the reason back. I went and I was told it by the leader of the princes, and on the way back it slipped and melted away in my mind like snow in the sun. That was many years ago, and much has happened since then. He looked up at Arthur and giggled again very gently. There is one thing I can remember from the truth drug. Apart from the frogs, and that is God's last message to his creation. Would you like to hear it? For a moment they didn't know whether to take him seriously. It's true, he said. For real. I mean it. His chest heaved weakly, and he struggled for breath. His head lolled slightly. I wasn't very impressed with it when I first knew what it was, he said. But now I think back to how impressed I was by the prince's reason, and how soon afterwards I couldn't recall it at all. I think it might be a lot more helpful. Would you like to know what it is? Would you? They nodded dumbly. I bet you would. If you're that interested, I suggest you go and look for it. It is written in 30-foot-high letters of fire on top of the quenchless Quasgar Mountains in the land of Svebsburby-Upstree on the planet Preliumtarn, third out from the sun Zas in galactic sector QQ7, active J Gamma. It is guarded by the majestic ventral shell of Lob. There was a long silence following this announcement, which was finally broken by Arthur. Sorry, it's where? He said. It is written, repeated Prak, in 30-foot-high letters of fire, on top of the quenchless Quasgar Mountains, in the land of Severby-Upstree, on the planet Plediumtard, third out from the— Sorry, said Arthur again. Which mountains? The quenchless Quasgar Mountains, in the land of Severby-Upstree, on the planet— Which planet was that? I didn't quite catch it. Severby-Upstree, on the planet— Severby, what? Oh, for heaven's sake, said Prak, and died testily. In the following days, Arthur thought a little about this message, but in the end he decided that he was not going to allow himself to be drawn by it, and insisted on following his original plan of finding a nice little world somewhere to settle down and lead a quiet, retired life. Having saved the universe twice in one day, he thought that he could take things a little easier from now on. They dropped him off on the planet Cricket, which was now once again a pleasant, idyllic, pastoral land, even if the songs did occasionally get on his nerves. He spent a lot of time flying. He learned to communicate with birds, and discovered that their conversation was fantastically boring. It was all to do with wind speed, wingspans, power-to-weight ratios, and a fair bit about berries. Unfortunately, he discovered, once you have learned bird speak, you quickly come to realize that the air is full of it the whole time, just inane bird chatter. There is no getting away from it. For that reason, Arthur eventually gave up the sport and learned to live on the ground and love it, despite the inane chatter he heard down there as well. One day he was walking through the fields, humming a ravishing tune he'd heard recently, when a silver spaceship descended from the sky and landed in front of him. A hatchway opened, a ramp extended, and a tall grey-green alien marched out and approached him. Arthur Phillip, it said, then glanced sharply at him and down at his clipboard. It frowned. It looked up at him again. I've done you before, haven't I? It said. Thus concludes my audiobook recording of Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams, the third volume in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I am Levi Aeryn. This is Now Read This. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for commenting, subscribing, liking, interacting with me as I progress through this journey of voice acting, narrating audiobooks, and generally just having the most splendid, wonderful time I could ever possibly have with you and with myself. I cannot tell you guys how much I love doing this. It is incredible to see the reactions I get from people, the love, the hate, the encouragement, the discouragement that I receive, the emails I'm getting. I cannot tell you guys just how much it really means to me and how much I love doing this. And I'm going to continue doing it indefinitely because it's just something I love to do. And I really want to do more of it. And I'm almost considering just doing a video every day. I know that's a big commitment, but we'll see. I don't know. Other than that, I've tallied up the votes for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Book 4, which is called So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. um, or The Princess Bride, and it looks like So Long and Thanks for All the Fish is kind of the generally accepted consensus. Everybody wants me to do the 4th book, and I'm already this far in, so I might as well just do it, and then I can really just decide if I wanna go on and read the kind of the last few books in the series, which aren't really as close to my heart. I mean, like, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish book 4 is definitely one of my favorites out of the whole series, so I want to record that, and I was planning on doing it anyway, so I'll just do that. But thank you guys again. Please share, like, comment. If you know anybody that needs an audiobook, please send them my way. Like, I love doing this. I'm gonna continue to do it no matter what, and nothing will really stand in my way from pursuing this dream. So, yeah, much love to you guys. Thank you for joining me weekly, and thank you for your patience as I've gotten this book out. There's been a lot going on in this year of my life that has prevented me from uploading as consistently as I want to, and I cannot wait for the next year. I'm about to hit 800 subscribers, which is incredible, and it's just going to keep getting more fun from here on out. The next thing I really want to implement is maybe like a better background and a better camera because the audio has already made me more inspired to make more videos, better audio, and I really want to do something like it would be cool to be on a green screen reading or doing costumes or something. So let me know if you have any suggestions. Thank you for following this journey through. Like I again, can't thank you guys enough. And may the good blood guide your way. I'll be uploading more next week, and you can expect So Long and Thanks for All the Fish next week as well. So, yes, much love. I hope you all had a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And yeah, nothing but love from me to you. Have a wonderful beginning of 2020 and Happy New Year.